the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. The best and brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes. We'll talk to them all, and we'll get the good, the bad, and the ugly on how they made it. Decoding the secrets of success. And now your host, Terry Barr.
Well, hey, we're back at this podcast, Grind to Growth to Greatness. We have a fantastic guest today. I've been looking forward to this guest for a while, ever since he said he would do this. So we've gone back and forth a couple times. We finally got settled in on a time. So we're excited to have him. Dr. Greg Bledsoe. He is from Arkansas, and he's currently lives in Arkansas, resides there with his wife, Sara, and their 3 daughters. He's quite the man. He's got a great bio. I want to touch on a couple things. He's an emergency room doc in Arkansas, and he's got his MD from the University of Arkansas, and spent some time at Johns Hopkins on the staff about 5 years. I was Teacher of the Year 2005, so that's quite an accomplishment at an esteemed institution like Johns Hopkins. Let's see. He had just recently in the last couple of years got his MBA at MIT. Pretty exciting. And he is the owner of a business called XpedMed. And they are a training expedition medicine company. They train other docs and expedition folks on extreme medical, which is really interesting. And I'll let him talk to you about that. Just as recently as this year, he was the Ryder Cup team physician over across the pond. We didn't fare too well in that one, but what an experience that must have been for him. And then obviously he's done a couple things in the past. He was a Secret Service consultant for George W. Bush. He was the personal doctor for Bill Clinton on a couple of his tours. So Dr. Greg Bledsoe has done an awful lot, and he is, to top it all off, he was an Eagle Scout. So you can expect that from him. So, but I want to welcome Dr. Greg Bledsoe into our show, and we want to get right down to it. We got short time because he's a busy guy, and let's get into it. So Greg, welcome to the show. Welcome. Thanks for doing this for us. I'm super excited to hear about everything you've done. And as we say, the grit behind the grind, or that journey below the surface, if you will, and how you got to where you're going. So tell me a little bit about your family, Greg, and where you grew up, and just start from the beginning.
So I grew up in Northwest Arkansas, Rogers, Arkansas. My dad was a general surgeon in the area, so I grew up in a healthcare family. Was active in our church and in the Boy Scouts, as you mentioned, and went to school up there. And, got interested in healthcare because of my family's affiliation with it, and ended up going to medical school at the University of Arkansas. And then from there went to Johns Hopkins, and then kind of all over the world. But the beginning of that was just, being in a small town in Arkansas, listening to my dad, watching his career. We went on a few medical missions trips. The first time I ever went overseas out of the United States was to the country of Haiti, where my dad had volunteered to be a surgeon there, and I helped him in the operating room when I was probably 16 years old. So, that was my first exposure to any sort of international travel, and it really marked me. I remember we flew over on, I think it was a DC-9, one of the old tail-dragging prop planes, and we landed on the runway in Haiti. And when they turned the engines off, there were chickens that were running across the runway. I thought, wow, this is different. This is different. But I had a great experience there. But that was the first time I ever went overseas, and it really marked me. And that was the beginning of my interest in global health and international healthcare, and kind of other things that I went on to do.
That's interesting. That was one of my questions. I all of the people that I've interviewed so far, either their environment, their parents, their where they grew up. Obviously, if smart people marry each other, then obviously there's some genetics there that kind of leads right into some things like that. But everybody said kind of the same thing. I grew up in this area. That kind of led me to this, led me to X, led me to Y. Tell me about your mom a little bit. I think, my mistake, she's in politics as well, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mom has a great story. She worked a little bit at my dad's surgical clinic, but for the most part, when we were growing up, she was a stay-at-home mom. Her background was journalism, and it was when I have two younger siblings, and when my youngest sibling went off to college, I remember my mom, we were sitting around the table one summer, and she said, when Trisha is my sister, when Trisha goes off to college, I'm either going to go back and get my master's degree, or I'm going to get a job, or I'm going to run for office. And we said, okay, whatever, Mom, you tell us what you're going to do. And she had volunteered on some political campaigns, but had really not been active. Like she had never run for anything. And long story short, she ran for state representative and got elected and served all of her terms there, got term limited out, and then ran and won again for the state Senate. And so she spent almost 20 years in the Arkansas legislature. But that was a second career, so to speak. Her first career was being a homemaker and raising us, which was, I feel like something that was very valuable. I feel very privileged that my mom did that, because it was a big.
Yeah, and so you're married to Sara as well. Sara, that for those that don't know, tell me a little bit about Sara. I know Sara a little bit personally, and you've got 3 lovely kids and very very accomplished in their own rights. But tell me a little bit about Sara and how she fits into the picture.
So the way I describe it is, everyone who knows both of us likes Sara better. So, but she's very personable. She's very warm. What attracted me to Sara was she's very beautiful, but she also has a warmth about her and a friendliness and an approachability that a lot of people don't have. And she lights up every room that she enters. And so I remember when we first started dating, I was at Johns Hopkins, and majority of my friends were physicians, public health people. And Sara and I started dating, and I would take her to these get-togethers, and it was so funny. I tell her even now, I say it was electric, because she was so unique in a very positive, fun way, and it just drew people to herself. And so I've always liked that about her. But she's been great. We've gone all over the world. She went with me to Antarctica when I served as a ship physician on an expedition down there, and she's gone with me to the Middle East and really all over the world. So she's been a great partner and friend, and I feel very blessed that
she's an interesting gal. She's a consummate mom as well. It's funny, I get to see everybody that Facebook and social media and stuff, and you can tell moms that are involved, and when moms are really really doing that thing. She's got her own master's degree, I guess, in education. So I think is she teaching the kids at home? Is that what I read? Maybe.
So when we moved back to Arkansas in 2015, we came in the middle of the school year, and we had toyed with the idea of homeschooling up until that time, but that was really the first time that we tried it, and it really worked for our family. My work schedule is really weird, and so it allows more flexibility for the family. And we've done it. We reassess every year. Every year we kind of do an assessment of what's best for that child. And for the most part, we've been sort of in and out of homeschooling for the past 8 years. And it's been a really good thing for our family. We really enjoyed it. And I feel really blessed that she's willing to do that amount of investment in the family and sacrifice.
Yeah. I mean, I've been around your children a couple times, not too much, but they all seem to be very distinctive. They have their own gifts, and they have their own, they're each going in different directions, but they're very likable kids. And so it makes sense, I guess, that you're, reassess every year to see what's best for whoever's doing what. But tell me a little bit about that. As a family, you and Sara, when you talk about, because you've done a lot of things. I mean, I look at this list of things and I think, how in the world does one person accomplish all these things? And good for you. Some of it, I'm sure of it, some of it's, intellectual capabilities and opportunities all wrapped into one. I don't know, but how do you assess as a husband and wife? And I don't get too far off the track, but this is part of your success. So how do you assess on a quarterly, bi-yearly, yearly basis, what you're going to do as a family how you're going to take your next step forward, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes that's easy because you have one thing that's been put in front of you and you just try to focus and do it to the best of your ability. But other times it can be difficult because there's multiple pathways you can go down. And I think there's no easy answer to that or, cookie cutter way of doing it, except to say, I listen to the input from my wife. She's got her finger on the pulse of each of the kids, what their needs are. That's one of the things. We pray about it, obviously, and we try to be sensitive to, sort of the bigger picture, what we want to accomplish with our lives, which is, doing something more than just living for today. But really, it's, I think it boils down to it's an act of seeing what's in front of you, and then saying, okay, what's the next thing that we should be doing or could be investing in that sort of furthers the overall principles of our lives or the goals of our life. And again, sometimes that's really easy, and then sometimes it's not so easy. And I've had periods of time where I felt like I had almost an unlimited number of directions I could go. And then I've had times in my life where it's been like, okay, it's one or two options, or maybe it's, there is no selection. It's just do this because you have to do it. So I don't know if that really answers the question.
No, it's good. I think that in everyone's life, there's, here's what I should do. Perhaps maybe I have two or three things. This is what I should do. Here's what I'd like to do or I'd want to do. And sometimes those are in conflict. Right. And that's an interesting question that I ask, and how do you work through that? Now, people like yourself, and I would say I'm in the same pew as you. So we have a faith, and that comes into play. And where do I guide where does my faith guide me into the things I should do? And then how does that stack up with the things I want to do? But, tell me about that a little bit. So how does your faith guide you in those two areas? Want and should.
Yeah. And those are really good. That's a good point. And I think it all sort of blends together in the sense of my faith helps direct. Well, first of all, my faith keeps my eyes above just my circumstances. So, I believe there's something beyond the here and now, and I try to live accordingly. So that's number one. But then number two, there are principles for living that my faith teaches me. And, one of the things it teaches me is that when circumstances go awry, when things aren't going well, that there's a bigger picture and there's more to it than just your day to day. And so you live your life by principles, realizing that, that you're being committed to the task at hand, living principles, having a life of integrity is a win in and of itself, even if your circumstances don't necessarily change. And that helps when things get difficult. But, one of the things I see with young people a lot, and some things that I struggled with as well, is you might have a direction that you want to go or an end point where you want to be, but that's 4, 5, 6 steps ahead. And there are people who, when they can't go to point A to point B, overnight, they get frustrated and they get discouraged. And so what I tell young people is that, it's great to have goals and a long-term picture of where you want to go. But if it's not happening as quickly as you want, a good principle to keep in mind is do the next thing, conquer, the little area, the little area that you've been given, be excellent at what the work that the Lord's given you to do today, and then build off of that. Don't sit waiting for the perfect opportunity. Start building today by developing excellence in your.
Yeah, that's great. I think our young people, unfortunately, are being fed a bill of goods. We've got these 7 or 8 second sound bites that say, grab your, do something, do what you're passionate about. Well, passion without purpose is really pretty empty. And so I think it's tough.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is like, look, just take the next step that's in the direction of the place you want to go. And I think that's crucial. Resilience. I know resilience is something that I try to instill in myself. I need to be resilient. I need to get off the ground when I'm knocked down. Is it something that, you talk about to your kids? What do you talk about to your kids individually or collectively? Because they're so individual kids. They're going different places, but What's the overall message to them on a daily basis as they try to find their way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think number one, your journey, there are principles that we have to live by, but your journey is going to look differently than my journey. So don't compare your journey to anyone else. If I'm talking to one of my daughters, I say, your journey, your temperament, your skill set, the talents that the Lord's given you are different than your sisters. Don't watch your sister and compare yourself to your sisters. Your journeys are different. Don't compare yourself to me and my journey, or Sara, my wife, and her journey. The Lord's journey for you is going to be different just because you're a unique individual. But what you need to do is you need to find out how the Lord's put you together, who He's made you to be, and then take that next step, start developing skills in the area that God's gifted you in, and learn how to hold fast even when times get tough. Because it's not just about finding a comfort zone. It's about being someone who is producing, for lack of a better word, quality work for the Lord's pleasure and glory. Not just about trying to find the most comfortable position.
Being comfortable in the journey, even though it might not be well-defined, maybe.
That's exactly right. And there's a great book, So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. I don't know if you know that, but that's a good one. And it talks about how he interviews some really top performers and he asks them how they got there. And most of them got to where they were in very, very unique ways. I mean, the path they traveled a little bit bizarre, but they're common principles. And one of them is that they didn't sit around waiting for the perfect opportunity. They developed their skill set from where they were in the beginning, and one thing led to another. So we talked about that.
That's interesting. Now, one of the things that I find very fascinating, because I get little things can stress me out on a day-to-day basis, and you kind of wrestle with those in your daily work. But you're in a business that's very high stress, I would assume. How do you deal with, emergency room? I have a friend here that's emergency room doc, and we talk a little bit about these things. But how do you go from patient to patient to patient with different maladies or different injuries or different problems? And how do you manage that moment in time with those each individuals on their needs, and their physical needs, I should say, and then their emotional needs? Because most docs are like, hey, I've got to get in, I've got to get out, and I've got to get to the next one. And you don't strike me as that kind of doc. But I was just curious.
Yeah, I think I've gotten better at that as I've gotten older. I've been medicine for 20 years now, but I think there's an aspect of time management and triaging, where you need to go first. That's an aspect of it. But another aspect is that, for lack of a better phrase, walking into a patient's room, you wipe the slate clean and you walk in. And one of the biggest mistakes that people have in general, not just emergency physicians, is they take baggage from one set of circumstances and one interaction into a new set of circumstances and a different interaction. The next person they're interacting with doesn't have the benefit of knowing what you just went through. So if I'm dealing with someone that just got run over on their motorcycle and there's blood everywhere, we barely resuscitate him, and it's this big stressful thing, and my next patient is someone with a head cold, they don't know that recent history. All they know is doctor's here, and maybe the doctor's running behind, and maybe I've been waiting too long, or maybe, whatever. And so from an emotional standpoint, wiping the slate clean and walking in and realizing that you're starting from square one with that person, and it's not fair to have the expectation of them that they are to know all that just happened. And I think being less judgmental and more understanding of that has really helped me in the.
Is that something? Does that take a mental, like an absolute effort on a daily for you?
Yeah,
it's a discipline.
It's a discipline, and it's something that naturally you have to take a step back. But it's helped it's helped me actually be a better husband and better parent, because the same principle, I work in a busy emergency department, crazy things happen, and I drive home, and as I'm walking into the front door of my house, it's the same thing. My kids and my wife don't know what I just went through. They're filtering through and dealing with the things in their lives. And so it's a matter of, it's an act of discipline. You wipe the slate clean and you walk in, and you give them the freedom to not to not know, and that's it. We'll talk about my day from time to time, but there's this, I think we all as human beings have this unspoken expectation that people are kind of, that they either know or they understand or they're plugged in somehow. And they aren't. And so I think, wiping that slate clean and walking in gives you a little bit of that just enough emotional distance to not just be reactive and to let things be a little bit more,
right. And it seems like that would be a discipline that would, you said, that could, that's helpful in your family life, but could be a discipline in anything that you do to wipe that slate clean, going from one discipline to the next. In other words, you go from the emergency room to, I knew you did some studying for your MBA. I mean, that's a whole different, skill set there. So wiping that emergency room doc from that, I mean, I'm sure, don't let me talk out of turn, but it seems like that discipline would be a top 10 discipline for anyone to grab, to say, if I can, when I walk out this door, if I can wipe the slate, I can be in a better place for my next activity or my next family member or my next friend or my next colleague.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gives you, I think it gives you more patience maybe, or more empathy for that second person that you see, because you don't have those, you by doing that, you don't place on them the expectation that they should be there, completely understanding what you've gone through, and gives you that emotional separation that allows you to be better in that.
So you were a professor for 5 years, and you did a couple things at Johns Hopkins. And so you're obviously a natural teacher. And how do you pass that along to, how do you teach that to your kids? How do you teach a discipline like that to your kids? Kids are much more reactive typically. They're much more emotional. So is there anything that you do for them? And I guess I don't want to talk about your kids too much, but it just seems like that would be a good way for a teacher to say, look, this is what I've learned. If you can do this.
Well, yeah. And I think coupled with one of the things that we talk about in our family is, we've said this ever since the girls were really little. And I think it's been a great conversation piece for us, especially as they've gotten older and gotten through their teenage years, which is, we tell them that the standard, we have an objective standard in our family for our behavior, for our reactions, for our language, for how we interact as a family. And standard is objective, and it's not correlated with how we feel. So if I wake up and I'm tired and I didn't get a good night's sleep, or I'm stressed or anxious, that still doesn't give me the right to yell and to be inappropriate or be angry or whatever. And so the way we phrase it to our kids is that no one in this family has the right to lose control and act inappropriately. And what that means is that we're all held to that standard. So if the girls are acting up and they're fighting or they're, arguing with us, we hold them to that standard. But likewise, if I come home from work and I'm frustrated or I'm tired or whatever, I wake up on the wrong side of the bed, I'm held to that standard. And so it's not, I get to act, angry and mean and impatient because Dad, or Sara gets to act like that because she's the mom. We're all held to that. But what that does, I think, is that it does a couple of things. Number one, it gives an objective standard, teaches the kids that there are objective standards, but it also teaches the kids and reminds us as adults that we choose our reactions. No one can make you behave inappropriately. No one can force you to be angry. between the circumstance and your reaction, there's a decision point, and you can choose your reaction. And I think that's something we've talked a lot about in our house, that no one has the freedom to act however they want, even if they're tired, even if they're hungry, even if they're frustrated.
Yeah, so I think that could translate into life. I mean, when they go out the door, unfortunately, maybe there's not objective standards in the world that we know it like they used to be, but nevertheless, when they go out, they still have a standard that they take with them, and they can take that into the world, into the workplace, or their friend groups, or what have you. I think that's a really good standard to have. Tell me about you how old are you? May I ask that? Is that I was like, this guy's 30 years old and he's done 150 things. So I'm glad to hear you're 50. That makes me feel better. But over the course of your, let's call it career, starting with med school and, whatever, who was the person or persons that you went to for mentoring? Like who could you call on, and has that changed? Has there been people in your lives that have come along that you say, you know what, I'm not sure Dr. Bledsoe doesn't have the answer to this. I need to go get some counsel. Who do you go to, and how do you vet that advice?
That's a great question. I think I've been fortunate that at different stages of my life, it's been different people. And for different topics, it's been different people. So, I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was in medical school, there was a guy that went to my church who was on faculty, and we became friends, and he became a mentor of mine when we were in medical school. I was in medical school in residency, and we would have a weekly Bible study, talk session, and he's still a friend. He was in my wedding, and so that's one aspect. And then, as I went through my career, there were others that, some shared my faith, some didn't, but were a few stages ahead.
Did you seek those people out? I mean, did you say, hey, I need to, or did they just fall into your peer group or, your surroundings from where we were spending your time?
Yeah. Some of them, it was, informal like that. It was just, the person who was a couple of rungs ahead of me on the ladder that, took a liking to me, and I respected them. And they never said I'm a mentor, course. And I never called them that. Maybe in retrospect, they most certainly were. But then there are other people that I sought out. So I remember there was a Christian author, Jerry Thomas. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote Sacred Marriage and Sacred Parenting. So I went through a stage where I wasn't really reading a lot of modern Christian books, and I remember Sara got a copy of, I can't remember if it was Sacred Parenting or Sacred Marriage, but she got a copy of it and was reading it and would read it to me at night. Oh, this is really good. Listen to this passage. And I was really impressed by this author. And one thing led to another, and I read a couple of his books. And I won't give you the whole long story, but the short version, there were a couple of other couples in my town there that also read his books. And we thought, wouldn't it be fun if we, went to one of this guy's conferences? And then we realized our schedules would never align. So I just emailed Gary Thomas and said, if we paid for you to come, would you just come and teach like our 5 families or 3 families? And to his credit, he said, sure. So make a long story short, Gary's become a friend and someone I bounce things off of, and we're still friends. This has been going on for 10 or 15 years now. And that's that I sought out because I respected his writing and what he had to say. And as far as going back to your original question, how did I vet him? I vetted him.
Yeah, or vet the advice. Yeah, obviously you'd seen that and it made sense to you over that period of time. Yeah. Kind of in that vein, as you're working through decisions in your life, or whether they're day to day or whether they're, career changes. I know you've recently had a little bit of a career change, and maybe something's not quite black or white to you. I in a business that there's black and there's white to me. And occasionally there's some gray.
Yeah.
And the gray is sometimes hard to figure out, and it's usually contractual or whatever. But in your business, if there's gray that comes up, it's not black, it's not white. What do you do to navigate the gray in your life? And you can call it what you want, but
boy, Yeah, that boils down to wisdom. And that, someone told me once, they said, how do you become wise? Well, you become wise because you have a lot of experience. Well, how do you get good experience? And that's from being unwise. From your lack of wisdom. And so, that's the path. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the gray area things, because there's no wrong or right, it's just a matter of wisdom. Do I get this loan? Do I not? Do I buy this vehicle? Do I not? Do I live town or that town? And I think, there are things that sometimes you just have to take a step. But if you can, and you have the ability to navigate it, I try to seek out, people who I think would know more about that topic than I do. So, it's about raising kids or, a marriage question or a relational question. Then I have a group of friends that I respect that I think would know about that, and I'll bounce things off of them. And the same thing with financial stuff, and the same thing with medical stuff. I think the key is that ultimately, though, you still have to make the decision. And I noticed that there's a personality type that comes to you for advice, and what they're really at,
make that choice for them. Yeah,
make the decision. No, and you can't. So you have to recognize that when you go to someone for advice, they're going to give you their advice, but you still have to weigh that, and ultimately you have to make the decision because you're going to be the one that has to take responsibility for that. And so that's the difficulty. But I think it is good to have not just, I'm a believer in not just one mentor, but sort of a team approach where you have people who are advisors in a lot of different areas because people have strengths in different areas. And so I had a group, an informal group. I kind of
and you're in that business. You're in the business of teams. You don't, somebody has a big medical situation. You're bringing all the brains and all the experience and all the wisdom, and that's what you want as a patient. So you want somebody to come in and bring all the rest to it.
This episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness is brought to you by Terry Barr, Distinctive Real Estate, advising families across Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia for over 15 years. Visit the website at terrybarrealestate.com.
So there, you've done a couple interesting things, and I kind of wanted to touch on those a little bit and kind of understand how you got those opportunities and what drew you to them. You spent some time, you participated in some diplomatic missions with President George W. Bush, and then you were a personal doctor for Bill Clinton on some tours, is what I read. Obviously, the connection with Bill Clinton, I'm assuming it's Arkansas thing, but tell me a little bit about that. I know you were the Ryder Cup physician. How did those positions come? And, you don't have to tell me the personal stuff, but was that opportunity? Was that, as a result of being, Greg Bledsoe, or can anybody work themselves into something like that? That's, people have a lot of dreams without focus.
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah. So I get asked that a lot, especially by medical students or recent medical school grads. And what I tell them is that I can't give you a roadmap to my career because it's been very eclectic and very odd. And it's contained some risk. There's not a residency program that teaches you how to be the Ryder Cup physician or the Surgeon General of the state, working with service. It just sort of, that's how my career unfolded. But the Secret Service stuff, the Department of Emergency Medicine at Johns Hopkins has a contract with U.S. Secret Service. There were a group of about probably 6 or 7 physicians, maybe 10 physicians that would travel. They were sort of on call. And so an acting president, so President Biden, has a White House group of physicians. And when he travels overseas, he has some military physicians that go with him. But former presidents, so Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, those are the folks that don't travel with. They have Secret Service protection, but they don't have medical care until outside of the Hopkins folks. So the Hopkins folks were hired to provide medical support when these former presidents were traveling around doing, fundraising, or diplomatic work, or whatever they do. And so that's how I ended up traveling with Bill Clinton to Africa in 2002. 2003, I was on Bush's advanced team when he went back to Africa and Senegal and Ghana Uganda.
Is that something you enjoyed? Is that something that was interesting? And
yeah, it was really fantastic. It's a little bit challenging. It's a different type of medicine because you're dealing with all the medical stuff, but you're dealing with it in a foreign country. So you have the tropical and travel medicine on top of that. But then you're also dealing with the potential tactical situations. You have people who are armed, potential people who might be seeking to harm the person that you're trying to protect. And you're also part of that mission is keeping the security people and the staff around the president healthy so they can do their jobs. So it can be challenging as, being a medical officer in that environment, but it was really rewarding.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it the government details with the ex-presidents or the co-authoring of Expedition Wilderness Medicine? And how in the world did you, I know you spent time at Johns Hopkins, but which came first? What drew you to that? That's an exciting form of medicine, it seems.
Yeah. So I did my residency in emergency medicine at Arkansas. And then I did a fellowship in international emergency medicine at Hopkins and got my master's in public health. And that's when I started working with the Secret Service and the diplomatic teams. And towards the end of my 5 years at Hopkins, I signed a contract with a publishing company to do the Expedition Medicine textbook, which then was a springboard into the Exped Med.
Okay. All right.
And so and then, just doors open as, you walk through one door and there's another hallway of doors. And then
I got the idea probably from your daughter. I don't know where I got it. I always see her reading a book of her next guest, and she has her own podcast. And so I was like, I got to go get that book and flip through that. Well, first of all, it's $100. So then I went to the bookstore to try to find it and look at it. But I did try, but I didn't get to it. So, but
that's fine.
But yeah, cool. That's a cool credential there. That's a cool accomplishment. So, and then I guess the last kind of fun thing that you've done recently is that you were the physician for the Ryder Cup. And that must have been something. I'm a golfer and have been for a lot of years and watched the Ryder. It's my favorite. I've been to it. And so when you got that appointment, I'll call it an appointment or whatever it was, but tell us a little bit about that and just your experience about that.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's funny how, again, there are things you can plan, but there are things that you can't at all. And some of the greatest lessons of my life have been things that have come out of nowhere that I couldn't have orchestrated. And that's a great example. So I got a call from a guy. First of all, I don't golf. I don't know. I barely know the rules. Maybe 5 times. But when we lived in Georgia, we became just some PGA golfers. And one of those just happened to be the Ryder Cup captain this year.
Yeah.
Zach. Yeah. So he's known me for about 10 years and we're good friends. And he knew my background as a physician. So he's the one that originally asked me and then put me in touch with the PGA. And, we had some meetings and that's how I got in touch with the PGA and then was hired by the PGA to do it. And it was an interesting experience because it's kind of akin to the Secret Service stuff in the sense that you've got a group of people that are there doing a mission is to keep them and their team healthy so that they can perform. And so, that involved, I put together a medical kit. I met with some of the European physicians. When I got on the ground there, I went to the course, the golf course early, a couple of days early, and walked the course, met with the physicians, met the security people, all those things. And then as things came up, we were able to deal with them efficiently because we'd put the time in to think through the possibilities. But it was a great experience. We didn't win, it was disappointing, but anytime you have the opportunity to watch, a person who is
anything. Yeah, it's amazing.
And whether it's, an athlete or a musician or an entertainer or a business person or a surgeon or whatever that is, to be able to stand there and watch these guys hit the golf ball the way they hit it was just otherworldly, because you're watching the very best in the world do it and compete against one another. It's incredible opportunity. And some of the shots they hit, I don't think I couldn't even imagine someone doing that.
Yeah.
Let a video game as opposed to doing it in real life, hitting it over trees, 150 yards down hills onto a little green in front of a 5,000 people who are, going crazy while you hit it. I don't know.
That's wonderful. One of my favorite commercials the PGA's done was a few years ago, 4 or 5, 6 years ago, and it just says these guys are good, and it would show these hitting these and it's so true. That's what you can say. These guys are just good. And I played some great golf in my younger years. I was, I played some amateur / golf and was a good handicap. But you go out and watch these guys, and they're another level. And then you take guys like Tiger, and his prime was just, he rose to the top. Yeah. Incredible stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen these guys, and what's amazing is, for the most part, they're not just good at golf. They're good at it's athletically. I jokingly tell Zach, we played basketball against each other. We played video games against each other. We've done, he's beaten me in every sport, every single time, except for skeet shooting, because I grew up at home, saw shooting the gun, and he's the only time I've beaten him in anything. But all those guys are all like that. They're great athletes. They're top competitors. They are incredibly disciplined, incredibly hardworking, and it's really inspirational to get them to have the opportunity to watch.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So tell me a couple other little questions that I have for you. Have you had any notable failures? I love Abraham Lincoln. He failed 12 or 13 times before he became one of the best presidents ever. And you can pick and choose. You don't have to tell me what you don't want to tell me, but have you had any notable failures in your life that just really kind of set you back and said that you learned some huge lessons from, that you can share what you learned on those?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And yes, but I want to put an asterisk next to it. I'm a big believer in, and I didn't know the term for it. I learned it in business school. I didn't know really what to call it, but in business school, they call it learning by doing. And so I'm a big believer in that. And there's a principle in business school when they tell you, like, if you're getting into a new industry, or you're trying to build a startup, or you're expanding into another product, there are people who want to analyze, and they waste opportunity because they're just looking at spreadsheets, and they're measuring and remeasuring, and they don't want to take any risks. That's one way of doing it. And, there's some advantages of obviously being someone who is analytical and thoughtful about, I'm not saying just, not any of that, but there's a tremendous amount that you can learn just by doing. And so I'm a big believer of you throw yourself into a task, and you sort of build the plane while you're flying, and you do the best you can. And then in that circumstance, if you fall short of what your ultimate goal is, you're still way ahead of where you were. So when I started my medical education company, it was about a year before the big recession in 2000. We started in 2007, really fast. And then when 2009 hit and the recession was really crushing everyone, we got hammered. And I learned a lot from that process. But we were able to, the company was able to survive, and it's going well now. But at the time, that was a big loss, and that was a big failure, because we lost tons and tons of money, and it really impacted our finances for a while. And then the other thing that, just recently, I ran for lieutenant governor of our state. I did win. But, part of one of the things that I decided at the very beginning was that I wanted to run. And I felt like no matter what the outcome was that there was benefit to running, even if I didn't win. And that has proven to be true. I met a whole group of people I never would have met. I was able to learn a lot of things, not just about the state, but about certain industries and certain individuals that I never would have known. And there have been, opportunities that I've had since that race that I would not have had I not run. And so both starting the company and running for office had points in time where you could say that was a failure. But if you take a step back and what I was just talking to Sara about this recently, if you look at those individual circumstances, there are wins and there are losses. If you take a step back and you consider your whole life, like, for lack of a better term, we call it Bledsoe Corporation or Greg Incorporated or whatever, into the big picture, those failures get collated with the wins, and you're still able to take principles and learning and opportunities from those things that are even formally classified as failures, so that they're not really losses, they're actually
and I mean, you talked about it early. I mean, that's where wisdom comes from. I mean, that's exactly where it comes from. And everybody I've talked to has said something similar. And I can tell you my biggest call them failures in life. I almost lost my chain of restaurants, and I was not drafted in the 83 draft I was supposed to be. But all of those things that I had going for me, that I had, call them fails, public fails, taught me so much going forward that I still reach back to those times and pull from those experiences. And, one of them was 40 years ago. So that's very interesting. So tell me what last couple comments for you. What books are you reading lately? I know you read a lot. A few times that we've been around each other, you got your nose in something, and I'm a real big reader myself. I love to read. What are you reading these days? And tell me why.
That's a good question. There was a book, I think it's called A Non-Anxious Presence. It's by Mark Sayer, Sayer. I think that's the title of it. Non-Anxious Presence. And it's about how this is a very anxious age. It's not just individuals have anxiety, the culture is anxious because there's a lot of, so it's how do you lead yourself and then how do you lead others in a culture that's very anxious and reactive. And he actually has, it's not a big book. It's actually a very interesting book, and that's what I'm currently reading. I just finished reading, what is it? Number Go Up by Zeke Fox, which is a book about Bitcoin and Sam Bankman-Fried and kind of Yuan and cryptocurrency. And then my next book that I want to read is just sitting here. It's this book by Tom Holland, Dominion, about Christianity and its impact on Western culture. And then right after that is
I've seen that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, potential. That's what I'm reading now, and I'll show you. This is my library that I've not gotten through. Those are some that I've read.
I picked this up when I couldn't find yours. I picked this up. It's called Walking in the Amazon. Have you read that? Yeah. It was interesting because he talks about putting together his med kits and how he had to go to great lengths to get what he needed on that. But I'm about halfway through. It's a good book. But so tell me, and maybe this is the wrong question for you, but what keeps you up at night? What keeps Greg Bledsoe up at night?
I think, I think two things. I think, number one, I always, I guess maybe it's a good thing, but I always have a lot spinning in my head. And so I'm always thinking, and that keeps me from sometimes calming down enough to sleep. But I think the biggest, if there is a stressor or something in the back of my head, I'm always trying to figure out a way. I'm always maybe not questioning myself, but I'm always trying to hold myself accountable for the time I have with my kids and with my family as we're all together when they're young, because, those are years that are fleeting. And, it's simplistic to say, well, spend all your time at home, but, and that's true, but, we still have to live. I still have to go do my job, and I have to, do this, the work prepares me to do my job. So I have to work in my office and read and, all the other things. And so I do struggle with making sure I want to be here. And when I'm here, I want to be present, like really here, just off in La La Land somewhere. And so I think that's a tension that never goes away completely. I think I've gotten better at it. And I think it also, as my kids have gotten a little bit older, they don't have that compulsive need to be like they did when they were 3 or 4 or 5. But I also don't want to, I want to value these years and invest in this time, knowing that once it's gone, it's another stage of life and it's gone. And so that's something that's in the back of my mind constantly in this.
Well, and I think that's good. That's good advice for any parent, whether they're young parents or seasoned parents, as we'll just call ourselves seasoned parents. Being present for your kids and being in their world is so important. Somebody gave me a piece of advice 25 years ago, and it was simply, if your son or your daughter, I have 2 sons, but if your son lets you into his private world, whether that's thoughts about girls or thoughts about his future or thoughts about, make sure that you listen from his perspective.
Yeah.
Because if you shut that door, or you perhaps belittle that, or don't take it as strongly as you should, then his perspective will be that you don't care. And so I've always taken that, when that door opens, I walk very carefully into that door and I look at what he's saying from his perspective, or either of their perspective. And I think that's gone a long way, but I like what you just said about that, about being parents. So, what's next? I know you just joined Kindly Human. That's, I guess, a mental health company, right?
Yeah, I've been doing some advice. Yeah, so the majority of my time, I run an emergency department here in Arkansas, and I run an EMS ambulance system. Human, I do some consulting for. I'm doing some more consulting with, there are people who have asked me to, help them as they travel, some athletes and entertainers and things. In 2019, I wrote 3 goals down in a piece of paper, which were all sort of moonshots. Things I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do them. The first one, I wanted to earn an MBA from MIT. And so it's number 1. That was a moonshot. That was, difficult. The second one was I wanted to run for lieutenant governor, which at the time seemed so far-fetched. That was a huge moonshot. And then the third one was I wanted to put together a consulting business. And I wasn't, that was kind of vague, but I wanted to figure out a way of, leveraging sort of the various threads of my diverse career and try to bring them together to provide value to people. And so that's what really my focus is right now. I've signed a contract to do a second edition of our textbook. So we're putting that together. And then I'm talking to some people about some consulting opportunities. And some of that has to do within the world of emergency medicine and dealing with emergency departments, mainly overseas. And then other parts of it is, people who are some athletes and, entertainment people and executive types that travel a lot and have needs, healthcare needs, helping them with those.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think as our world spins out of control, it seems like it's gotten so much smaller and so much more out of control. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it just seems like it's really spinning hard. And your type of career, your type of skill sets, they fit pretty well with that global need for at least education in that department. Yeah. So,
yeah,
it's for sure. For sure. Well, listen, I appreciate you doing this. I know you took time out of your busy evening. You did a little bit of sledding out in the snow with the kids, and had dinner, and now they're probably knocking at the door saying, "Where are you, Dad?" But I certainly appreciate you sitting for this. It's always interesting to hear people's perspective on life's success and what their journey's been. So thanks for being here, Greg.
Well, hey, it's a real privilege. Thanks for inviting me on, Terry.
I appreciate that. So tune in next week to Grind to Growth to Greatness. We'll have another guest. I won't tell you who it is. So you gotta tune in, subscribe, and like, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Greg.
You've been listening to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. Our passion is to talk to the brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes, anyone who's made it, and dive into their struggles, their successes, and their secrets. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Grind to Growth to Greatness. See you next time.